Welcome, everyone. I will turn it over to Commissioners Loizon and Terry.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Yvette Loizon. I am one of the interim commissioners on the Community Commission for Public Safety and Accountability. I'm really excited to be here today with all of you and so happy to have such a great crowd. I would like to introduce to you one of my other fellow commissioners, Remel Terry, who has been my partner in working on the association's order that we're going to talk about today. Remel, just want to introduce yourself for a minute.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. Interim Commissioner Remel Terry. Also excited to have you all here to share about this great work Yvette and I have been doing, and look forward to any questions you all have at the end.
Okay, we're going to just jump right into it. The purpose of today's meeting is to talk to you about CPD's policy prohibiting officers from associating with criminal groups. We have updated this policy and refined it, and we plan to vote on the updated policy on November 13th. So we're here today talking to all of you first and foremost because we are really interested in your input on the policy, and also because we're hoping that we can put a little color into what our process has been and what the policy that you're reviewing is going to look like and how we got there. There it is. I'm looking for my next slide. This is the table of contents. This is just a little roadmap for all of you so that you know what we're going to be talking to you about today. First of all, we're going to review the Commission's policy-making powers, and those powers come to us pursuant to the ordinance that was passed by the City Council in July of 2021. Remel is going to talk to you a little bit about that in a moment. We also are going to talk to you about our policy development overview and our process with CPD and creating the policy that we're all going to be talking about today. We want to make sure that you are aware of what the current association's order looks like, the one that is currently on the books, and the changes to the association's order that are going to be proposed and voted on by us next month. Finally, at the end, we'll save some time for a question and answer session. We're really happy to answer any questions that you have and get your input on this really important policy. And we're looking forward to that exchange at the end of our remarks. Okay, so our policy-making powers are available to us pursuant to the Chicago Municipal Code. This is the Commission for Public Safety and Accountability Ordinance. It's 2-80-110, and it provides that any new or amended policy shall become effective only after commission approval. A new or amended policy may be initiated by the department, COPA, the police board, or the commission. With respect to our policy-making powers, just want to be clear that the commission has powers over general orders. We don't have power over special orders, although we do have an opportunity to provide CPD with input on those special orders, just like any other community members can. Also, there are certain categories of orders that deal specifically with the consent decree. Those don't fall within our policy-making power. However, the association's order that we're talking to today is a general order. It does follow under our policy-making power. And so we were very excited to be able to collaborate with CPD and work on this order because, as you know, you all know, this is really important to making sure that we can continue to build trust and between police officers and the communities they serve, and also hold police officers accountable for behavior that is inappropriate. Policy-making powers, what does it mean? We have the authority to propose policies to CPD. Those are policies that we can come up with ourselves. If we see a deficit in CPD's current policies, we have the ability to propose new ones. We also have the authority to review policies that are proposed by CPD. That means that if CPD is going to make a change to a policy that's currently in effect, or if they're going to create a new one, we have the ability to collaborate with them on that process and provide input. We also have the authority to decide if a proposed policy should get enacted. And that means that we review that policy, we collaborate with CPD so that we understand why they believe that policy is necessary. We do a bunch of work to try to figure out whether that policy is really going to enhance public safety, and then we make decisions related to that.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Loizon. So I'm going to share really quickly a couple of slides related to our policy development overview, because this piece is very important part of the work, just so we can level set everyone's understanding about what our oversight authority looks like as it relates to policy development. So as Commissioner Loizon already pointed out, either the Chicago Police Department or the Community Commission for Public Safety and Accountability, or CCPSA, makes a determination that they want to propose a policy. After there has been a policy proposal or proposed change to an existing policy, then depending on who initiates it, either the commission or CPD will provide any comments, suggestions, or replies. After we've had a bit of that back and forth with providing our feedback, we work collaboratively with CPD to finalize the draft. Ideally, we want to make sure that all of the subject matter experts within the department, as well as from what we know as the Community Commission, has weighed in and put forth the best possible policy for public comment. And just so you know, during this process of us collaborating and doing the reviews, this gives us a window of at least 30 days we spend trying to go back and forth, providing feedback and any recommendations or edits we may have. And so after we get to more of a finalized policy, which is essentially where we are right now today with this particular association's order that we're going to review further, we open it up for public comment. And so that is a big piece of why we're hosting this webinar, because we do want to solicit public comment about this particular general order and making sure that everyone is not only educated on what it means, but understanding the types of necessary feedback that we are here to solicit. And so we have about 30 days for this public comment period as well. And so after public comment has closed and we've had an opportunity to compile and document and see what we're hearing and incorporating any of those suggestions and recommendations as necessary, we then move forward to a commission vote. So that is where we, all 7 of us, or the quorum that is present, will have to vote on the passage of this said order. And in order for a general order to be passed, it has to have majority vote. And so once that majority vote is received, it then is handed off to the mayor's office for review and actual enactment. And so the mayor at that particular point has 60 days to review the policy and then come back with any additional feedback or just passage of the general order as is. And so if we can go to the next slide. And so a bit about where we are in our development process as it relates to this association's order. So CPD proposed changes to the association's order back in January. This is something you all have heard about consistently. At the time, we did take the opportunity as a commission and working very intently with our amazing staff on crafting our comments and recommendations that we did provide back to CPD. And in between all the time frame of all the courses of these months that have passed, we did work collaboratively with CPD. We did meet with them on more than one occasions to talk about different recommendations, edits to the proposal. And so, you know, if you've been participating in our previous meetings, or if you go back and watch any of the YouTube videos, our updates, we have shared how a lot of the commission's feedback has been incorporated. And we'll go into further detail about what the existing policy looks like and what are the changes, so you can get a better idea of the improvements to this policy. And so right now, as it relates to this association's update, we're at public comment. And so we are slated to potentially vote on this particular general order for passage at our November 13th monthly public meeting. And just so you know, the reason this monthly public meeting is a little bit earlier than the others is because during the months of November and December, we have to edit, you know, we have to reconsider the time frame because of the holidays. And so I'll turn it back over to Commissioner Loizon to talk about the current association's order.
Okay, so the current association's order is the prohibition on associations with criminal organizations. And I'm just going to highlight for you the language there that says criminal organizations, because as you get an opportunity to see the changes in the order, you'll note that the title has been changed to encompass other associations with bias-based groups. The last time this policy was updated until we began working on it this past year was in 1997. The current association's order really focuses on police officers' associations with members of criminal groups. And it says that police officers cannot do that. And it also says that they cannot be members of criminal groups. One of the things that we were concerned about early on in our process with the language of the current association's order is what the term associate means, because we wanted to make sure that as we made changes to this order, we were being careful to not include people as violating this order who potentially were associating with members of a criminal group, because those members happen to be individuals who they were related to or family members of or lived in the same home with. So I say all that just to be clear that in going through this process, we paid really close attention to what the current order looked like. We asked CPD a bunch of questions about the language in the current order, how it's normally applied, and then based on the information that we received and feedback that we got from other commissioners and community members, we went to work to try to modify that language so that it was meeting the needs that we currently think the order has. Okay, the current association's order as it stands today says officers can be punished for membership in a criminal group only if CPD had already identified the group as criminal. That is another issue that we had a lot of questions about, because the identification of a group as criminal, and as you will see now that we are also including bias-based groups, that identification was a point of concern for us, given that groups change their names, they could change their dynamic, they change their focus. And so we wanted to make sure that in modifying the current association's order, that we were being cognizant of the fact that sometimes membership in a group in terms of its name or a prior identity can be very fluid. The current association's order key issue. The current policy does not define criminal organization. And the current policy places a big emphasis on CPD maintaining and using a list of prohibited groups. Again, this goes to the point that I just made. without a definition of criminal organization and with a list being the guiding principle as to whether or not a person has violated the policy, we had a lot of concerns that people could fall through the cracks if the list wasn't properly updated, or if their group changed its name, or if there were opportunities to make arguments about whether or not it was truly a criminal organization if it didn't appear on the list. You'll see when Remel goes over the proposed modifications to this order that there's a greater emphasis on conduct of whatever organization is prohibited, as opposed to names just appearing on a list. The current policy doesn't mention many ways to identify a person as a member. This is a really significant point. And again, we want to focus on conduct. We want to focus on having identifiable things that we can point to that demonstrate that the person is part of a group or associating with a group that they shouldn't be. So the current policy provides examples of how group membership could be spotted, but it only provided a few options like tattoos, symbols, and informants. So I want to highlight this point. Again, when you hear Remel's presentation on the modifications to the order, I think you're going to see that the options are a lot greater and there's a greater focus on really honing in on the members' conduct.
Thank you so much. So as Yvette pointed out, I'm going to go a little bit more in depth about what the current changes are to the order so that you understand what we're really looking for in terms of feedback. So one of the key amendments to this order is that it clarifies that this policy doesn't just apply to criminal organizations, it's also inclusive of biased organizations. So the order will now be called Prohibitions on and Bias-Based Organizations. As you heard Yvette speak to earlier, it was mainly focused on criminal organizations that had been identified. It wasn't necessarily based on conduct or behavior. So if we can go to the next slide, it also adds a definition for what a criminal organization is, as well as what a bias organization is. This is also another big change to this policy, as it did not outright outline or define what criminal organization was. And now we see this expansion in terms of clarifying the language to also ensure that these bias-based organizations are included, which gives these two big impacts. And so these impacts are related to how an officer, right, cannot be a member of any group that meets the definition. So similarly to what Yvette pointed out, to where there was like a few sort of identifiers via tattoos, emblems, and things of this nature. By definition, right, officers will be looked in comparison to the definition. Like, does this entity or the behaviors or conduct align with what we see in this definition, which is giving the department a broader way to hold people accountable versus just the list that has been spoke about. So we want to just make sure the department has full autonomy to hold officers accountable beyond whether or not the name of an organization is listed, but more so, does the behaviors and the conduct align with the definition that has been outlined? So more people are aware of that. So if we can go on to the next slide. The second impact of this new definition is it clarifies that the policy doesn't just apply to street gangs, right? The policy also applies to hate groups and terrorist groups as well. So it's just really important that we make sure you all are aware of these two impacts with relation to this policy, because we know that there have been a lot of talks about a list, and we want to just show how this clarification has broadened the scope, and it's more so about the behaviors, the actions, conduct, and not just identified as a group that's prohibited. And so examples of some of these prohibited groups include around the hate and terrorist organizations, groups that promote illegal prejudice, right? Groups that aim to overthrow the government, groups that interfere with police duties. So these are defined actions, conduct that someone can be held accountable to, and again, beyond whether or not a group has been identified. And so the draft changes to the order, some additional things that we spoke about with CPD and they were in agreement with were ways to track whether or not, you know, an individual is in a prohibited group. So are expanding things to make sure that they're even able to gather the necessary data, right, to be tracking whether or not someone is engaged with a prohibited group. And so the new ways in which they are going to be able to track membership is the recruiting that's done for organizations. Are individuals involved in recruiting for organizations? Are they involved with fundraising for organizations? Are they involved in organizing and attending events? Or are they involved in promoting these events, including social media? So this is going back into giving more context and detail so that people are very clear on what behaviors or conduct are allowed. So similarly to how Yvette pointed out earlier, if I live in the house with someone, you know, and maybe because they have the address, they're sending out mailers, that isn't necessarily saying that I am connected or involved, right, with this organization. But if I'm recruiting for the organization or fundraising on the behalf of, or organizing and attending events or promoting things on social media, right, I have clear indicators of how I will be held accountable if I'm involved in any organization deemed to be criminal or bias-based. So big picture, right? So what are we thinking about big picture? What we see here and what we've been able to come up with is clarity on what groups are prohibited. And the way that we've been able to do that is by identifying behaviors or conduct, right, that's not permissible. And so it's reduced this emphasis on a list, whereas we can see based on the previous policy, the way in which it was written, it was limited, right, in the way in which they were able to identify the involvement of officers. And so that is, you know, part of the goal of this one, to bring about that clarity so people are sure on what is acceptable and not. And then there's more focus, as I've re-emphasized, and you probably will hear in our responses to your questions, a more focus on the conduct or the behavior of the organization's members versus whether or not they've just been identified on a list. So for us, our next steps, the commission, as we pointed out, is engaging with Chicagoans and collecting feedback. This webinar is one way in which we're doing that. And yes, if anyone is inquiring on how we're trying to engage with officers, leadership on down, we are working with doing something similar as well with their officers and even leadership to get their engagement and feedback as it relates to this policy. And so we're looking to do a tentative vote on this on November 13th, which will be our monthly public meeting. So if you are available, please attend. And if this order then is passed, it will become effective after 60 days of the mayor's review.
Okay. Thanks again to all of you for attending. It really is awesome that we have such a big crowd here and that so many people are interested in this order and what it's going to mean in the future. Remel and I have really enjoyed and have felt, you know, excited and challenged to be working on this particular order. We know how important it is. And so it's really gratifying to all of us to see all of you here today. We're going to move into the question and answer part. But before we do that, there's just a couple of final points I want to make sure that I re-emphasize so that we're all on the same page as you're formulating your questions. One point that I wanted to make is this. The CCPSA is an accountability role in this process. So it's our job first to ensure that the community has input in this general order before it, makes its way onto the books, so to speak. And our second role in accountability is to make sure that the policy, once it is enacted, is being implemented properly. CPD ultimately oversees the implementation of the policy, but we will continue to be involved in monitoring the policy and making sure that CPD is enforcing the policy according to the language of the general order and according to its spirit and purpose. All that being said, I want to make sure that I make it real clear. It is not CCPSA's job to have any role in the discipline of police officers who are impacted by this policy in any way. So we do not get involved in investigations on discipline. We don't make recommendations for discipline. We don't have any authority to fire police officers or make any other disciplinary recommendations or decisions related to them. We are purely in an accountability posture over the policy and the way the policy is being utilized. So I wanted to make that clear. The second thing that I also wanted to make clear to everybody is that the commission fully recognizes that any policy is going to need to be implemented and reviewed in order to make sure that it is working properly. I wish that I could tell you that Remel and I were like so smart. We are going to be able to cover every base with this policy from day one, but we recognize that we're going to have to spend some time with this policy and see if it's appropriately being used. And so before we get to the question and answer rules, I just wanted you all to know that we have a real commitment to making sure that we don't just check the box and say, okay, that policy's done. We're going to continue to monitor this policy. We're going to continue to collaborate with CPD, and we're going to continue to do whatever we need to do to make sure that we improve it so it appropriately meets the needs of the department, and it appropriately needs the need that we all know is out there, that community members can feel like they can trust the police officers that are serving and protecting them. Okay, with that, here are the Q&A rules. If you have, I don't know by heart. To ask a question, you need to type in the Q&A, enter your name, or ask to be unmuted, or you can type your question into the chat. We will call on names and read off the questions. When we call your name, could you please begin by saying it and spelling it? And as usual with all of our meetings, you have 2 minutes to give your remarks. And then the next slide is going to have a QR code for you. There it is. You can also submit comments by using the QR code. Okay.
Hi, Yvette and Remel. We've received a question from Eli Washington. Eli, I will read your question. Eli's asked, what other large municipalities have this ordinance and have been successful with court challenges?
Eli asking about the policy or the overall ordinance for the commission. I think
he's asking about, my understanding is he's asking about this policy. And I think just the one, I'll let you two, we did look at other jurisdictions. I don't know that we're familiar with or understand the court challenges around this, but we did look at many other jurisdictions. Any additional qualifications there?
I would just say that there are several other jurisdictions that do have policies that are like this. If we compared them word for word, they wouldn't be identical. Cody, you could probably help me out with this. At one point, I knew the list of other cities. I think Dallas, New York, LA, like the usual suspects, they all have some form of a policy like this. But I just want to be clear that in creating this policy, we were really working to make sure that we weren't reinventing a wheel that already existed, because the criminal organizations policy was already on the books. We felt that that policy really had the skeleton of what we were going for. We just needed to enhance it to ensure that it encompassed some of the bias-based groups that we had concerns about. And, you know, as with any policy, it's really important that when you're working with the police department on these policies, you're including language and you're modifying policies in a way that is familiar and makes sense with the way that they read policies, do policies, are used to policies. So I think if you compared ours next to another city, it probably wouldn't look the same, but policies prohibiting police officers from participating in bias-based groups certainly exist all over the country.
We have questions both in the chat and people who want to speak. So we'll go to somebody who would like to ask a question, and then we'll go back to the chat. So the first person we have that's asking a question, who would like to ask a question, is Tomro Dobbs. I'm going to unmute you. 1 second.
I don't know if I have an option to do anything else. Yeah, that's all.
All right, go ahead. I've allowed her to talk. All right, let's move to, I'm sorry, I'm not getting that. Let's move
Hello?
to, oh, hello, there you are. Go ahead.
Hi. Oh, apologies about that. I had to unmute. So I put in the chat, will this policy take account to acknowledge that what anti-Blackness is and how it shows up in law enforcement employment and with peace officers' engagement with the community to create a discriminatory impact?
I don't think that the language of the policy speaks directly to that in those terms. Its primary focus is to ensure that police officers, it's clear to police officers that they are not only prohibited from being a part of any kind of criminal organization, but they're also prohibited in being a part of any kind of bias-based organization that certainly would be directed at members of the Black community, definitely. However, speaking directly to things like to the terms that you've used in your question, it does not speak directly to that.
No, am I on mute? Okay. Yeah, so thank you for that, but no, this policy isn't specific to those behaviors aside from if there is involvement with an organization that participates in anti-Blackness practices or any sort of discriminatory behaviors, because there is policy if there is an officer that is, spewing hatred or being discriminatory towards someone. This policy specifically is centered around any association with a criminal organization and or bias-based entity.
Great. Thank you. I am going to unmute Sharon Fairley. She has a question. 1 second. Find Sharon on this list. All right, let me go to another question that's in the chat. Jessica Eanes has asked, why is sharing a residence with an active member of a group not considered association in this context when it can constitute a parole violation for other contexts? I'm struggling to find consistency in terms.
Sure, I could answer that, I think. We're not saying that it's a bright line rule that it would never constitute association with an organization. What we're saying is that every time a disciplinary matter is brought against a Chicago police officer, that disciplinary matter is investigated fully so that all of the facts and circumstances are clear to the investigators, and then disciplinary action towards a police officer is determined based on that investigation. We can imagine scenarios, for example, where maybe a female police officer has children that are involved in a criminal activity. We would not want to punish a mom for speaking to her children. We don't think that that would be an appropriate way to utilize this kind of order. However, if there were circumstances where that mom was speaking to her children and potentially advising them of ways to get out of criminal, to get out of trouble with the police, or, I mean, there's a million scenarios we could come up with. But what we really want to do is this. We know that there are a lot of police officers that work for the Chicago Police Department who are good police officers, good people, who have family members that may struggle in some fashion, and it may be with the criminal justice system. We don't think that every police officer in that situation should be disciplined for misconduct related to this specific policy. That may be appropriate in some circumstances, but in a lot of circumstances, it may not be. So we wanted to make sure that the policy was written in such a way, again, that focused on conduct, as opposed to whether or not this criminal organization or this bias-based organization appeared on some list, so that in situations like that are nuanced, the investigation could reveal those nuances and appropriate decisions could be made. Please don't mistake me as saying that we're trying to provide an opportunity for any kind of loophole or wormhole so that police officers can get out of discipline. We're not saying that. We're just saying that the facts and circumstances of every case are going to be different, and they should be viewed on an individual basis, as opposed to just having hard, bright line rules with no opportunity to consider the nuances of a person's situation.
Thank you. I'm going to, Sharon Fairley, sorry about that earlier. I'm going to allow you to talk. Go ahead with your question.
Can you hear me now?
We sure can.
Okay, great. So thanks so much to all of you guys for doing this. It's such an important topic. I have 3 issues that I just want to point out. So the first is on defining the nature of the groups that you are saying the officers are going to be prohibited from participating in. When you say illegal prejudice, my concern is that the term prejudice is going to be considered vague. And so I think that there may be other ways to more explicitly and more clearly define that, that maybe you might take some language from, for example, the civil rights laws. Then the other thing is, and I think this was brought up by another caller, if you're only restricting membership in groups that are doing things that are illegal, that's going to not get at a lot of concerning groups that we might want to prohibit officers from associating with. So say, for example, there's a group that just believes that, Black people are inferior because they have smaller brains, for example, and that they should all be sent back to Africa, right? So that they're not advocating, they're not doing anything illegal, but that belief is also, very, very troubling. And to me would say that an officer, would be suspect in his ability to do constitutional policing. And so I would just ask you guys to think about that. And then the second thing is when you're looking at defining how an officer is connected to a specific organization, how they, are associated with it. I think first you may want to include some provision to say officers, if they had once belonged to something, what they need to demonstrate to show that they have rescinded their membership, because that may be something that comes up. And then also you know, when officers actually just give money, donate. I mean, fundraising is different than going out and saying, I'm going to go get funds from other people is different than just merely providing your own financial support. So I'm just wondering if you thought about that, or if there's a reason why you haven't sort of included just providing financial support as being problematic. Now, again, we know that the Supreme Court considers financial contributions to be speech. And so there, you know, again, that there's still going to be First Amendment issues, but we're already in First Amendment land here, and we're already restricting the First Amendment freedom of association here. So, you know, maybe that will not be problematic. And so the last thing is, you know, I haven't heard any discussion about what the proposed punishment would be for a violation of these policies. And I think that that's going to be really important, because I think part of the challenge is CPD has not implemented as strong or as a strict punishment as we want to see in these cases. And, you know, is this something that you guys see as being like, literally, if someone's associated with one of these organizations, that says that they are unfit for duty as a Chicago police officer, and the appropriate penalty is discharge, you know, or is there something less that you guys are willing to accept? I think that that's something that should be considered to be part of the policy, or else we may have problems with enforcement of the under enforcement of the policy from that perspective.
Thank you, Sharon. Thank you, Remel. Yvette.
Yeah, I will.
Go ahead, Remel. You can go first.
Just really quickly, I do want to point out a few things because you had a lot there. Sharon, thank you for your question. And the initial things that you pointed out, I do want to clarify that in the policy, it's definitely more detailed than what we provided in our presentation. We wanted to just pull information. So to your point about the fundraising aspect, right? It also includes, you know, personal donations and things of that nature. So something that you reference. So the policy is definitely more detailed, but that's way too much information to just speak at people. And so we provided a high level overview in hopes that you all will take an opportunity to look at the policy. It's 5 pages in its entirety so that you can see if it's inclusive of the things that you've pointed out. And I believe for the most part, the things that you've identified in terms of what is prohibited is included within the policy. And as you pointed out, the piece about an organization who is looking to deny others their rights, when you specifically pointed out the things about what they believe Black people should do and, you know, be shipped back to wherever, like that sort of any unlawful force or advocates for acts of, right, is included in the description within this policy. So I did want to make sure that we pointed that out, and that if anyone else on this call has any sort of questions about how in-depth it goes, we really do suggest that you go and read the entire policy so that you can see all of the things that are included, because as Yvette pointed out earlier, we spent a lot of time working on this and making sure as much detail as we could get into this policy, that it existed where it did not limit us to where people could sort of circumvent the policy. And so Yvette, that's the piece that I wanted to really quickly add on, because I have the policy up and I didn't want to read it verbatim, but I wanted to just point out a few things that were mentioned that are included in this order.
Yes, that was all, you were taking the words out of my mouth. I'm just gonna, I'm gonna highlight a couple more points. One is, I think it's really important to be clear that we are not saying that you can only be subject to discipline for bias-based conduct if it's criminal in nature. That is not what the language of the ordinance says at all. And as a matter of fact, it was one of the reasons why we worked really closely with CPD to change the title of the ordinance so that there wasn't a focus only on criminal conduct. And if you look at the language of the ordinance, it'll become real clear to you that it's criminal or biased organizations. They're very specifically defined In addition to being very specifically defined, there's very specific prohibitions that are listed. And then there's a whole section about determining and substantiating the violations of this directive. And it describes all the ways that that's going to be happening. To anyone who's tuned in today, who doesn't, spend their time in the weeds of CPD directives, one thing I would just like to say as kind of a guidepost to reading the ordinance, when you pull it up online, you'll see that there's portions that are underlined. The underlined portions are the portions that are changed. So when you're taking a look at the ordinance, I think you'll see that there's a lot of underlined sections, and those sections were all things that were added in to, I think I just said the ordinance and I meant the general order. They were all added into this general order to ensure that we were being really, really clear about what type of conduct was prohibited, and the ways in which those assessments would be made. The last point I would just want to make in response to Sharon's comments, and I appreciate you for making them, because you've just given us a great opportunity to clarify a bunch of stuff. So thank you, Sharon, for that question. But I do want to say this, I emphasized it a little bit before, I'm going to say it again. We are not in the business in drafting policies of making specific recommendations as to how CPD disciplines their officers. We have opinions for sure, but there's no general policy that says, if you do X, Y will happen to you. That's not the way the disciplinary system is set up. And we're not here to talk about the way the disciplinary system is set up. So I'm not going to get in the weeds of that today, but I just want to be clear that those kinds of punishments or sentences, if you will, are not included in general orders. That's an entirely different system that involves various other entities. It could involve COPA, it could involve the police board, it could involve BIA, it could involve a superintendent making the decision. It could involve arbitration. There's a lot of components there. The short answer to your question is, if you're asking CCPSA if we think people who are involved in bias-based groups that target, specific people, and if in some of the examples that you gave, Sharon, do we think those people should be Chicago police officers? The answer is no. However, as we said before, there's different circumstances and scenarios to every single case. And so I would never want to be in a position where we were saying, if a person does X, they 100% for sure have to get fired, because until we know what X is, that I don't think that's a fair approach. But I'm really confident that the language of this general order provides real clear guidelines as to what conduct is inappropriate and is not what we want Chicago police officers to be doing. So I think I'm speaking for Remel and I when I say that we're confident that the language of this general order is going to be able to put the Chicago Police Department and all the other entities responsible for discipline in a good position to appropriately discipline officers in a way that is necessary for their conduct.
Thank you. We have a question. We have 10 minutes. We want to get through these from Deborah Bennett. She asked, has CPD or FOP opposed any of these proposed changes?
So with respect to CPD, I can say that they have been an absolute pleasure to work with in this process. There hasn't been opposition at all, which is not to say that they just put everything in the general order that we suggest, but there has been a real collaborative effort. There's been a lot of give and take, a lot of education on their part, letting us understand why things are drafted or written or what some of the challenges are. And then from us as well, so that they can understand community members' specific concerns and what this looks like when you're just a civilian looking in. It really has been a very good process, and we're continuing to work on it, and CPD has made a commitment that they will continue to work with us on this policy once it's in place, so that we can ensure that we didn't miss anything, or there isn't anything that's falling through the cracks. And with respect to FOP, the only comment that we got from FOP about this policy was a request that police officers have an opportunity to provide us feedback, which was something that was in the works already. We were putting it together with our staff on our end before we kind of put it out to the police and to the unions. So, so far we haven't had any issues related to that.
Great. There is a question, two questions, one from Suzanne Kraus and one, a similar question from D. Clancy, asking about the mayor's role in this. Do you expect the mayor to approve what you will deliver? Might he veto it? And D. Clancy asked sort of a similar thing. What's the mayor? Do you anticipate the mayor will veto the policy within the 60 days he has to review it?
Yeah, I don't know that we have an expectation of how Mayor Johnson will decide on this policy, but to go back to a question, this policy was created within collaboration with CPD. Like Commissioner Loizon pointed out, a lot of the things that we wanted to see to bring about the necessary clarity to address some of the concerns that have already been raised on this call have been included into this new general order. So I think we're optimistic that we've done a really great job in making sure that this is a solid general order that can be implemented and monitored, right? To see if it is living up to the outcomes in which we desire, and, you know, revisiting it as necessary. So I think we're optimistic that this is something that the mayor can get behind, but, you know, we don't anticipate any vetoing or anything, but we don't know how the mayor will decide, as those things are done privately.
A question from Jenny Schaefer. I heard there will be a list of prohibited organizations that gets updated semi-annually. Is that still the case? Sounds like you're saying it's going to be more based on actions than named organizations.
Yes. So I'll take it really quickly, and Yvette, if you have anything to add on. Yes. So that's why we wanted to have this webinar. Again, as we pointed out, when you look at the policy, it's very detailed, or the general order is very detailed about what sort of conduct and behaviors are prohibited. And we really want that to be the emphasis, because what happens is, as we pointed out in the existing ordinance, it was off of what had been identified. But a lot of the issues that we have seen today, those organizations were not identified, but we could all agree on this call. And as Yvette pointed out, the commission would not want anyone, you know, being a part of the department who is participating in conduct that's unbecoming of the department. So I think that list piece, this policy is showing how it's more important to have the behaviors and conduct documented, as the list can be very limiting.
This is a question coming from Stephen Sesso. Would you consider a member of the BLM movement to be a member of a bias-based organization? BLM has structure, receives funding, has an active membership, and has committed crimes of violence.
I think the answer to that is that if there were an allegation related to BLM, and that allegation was received by CPD, they would investigate it the way they would investigate every other allegation that came in. And there would have to be a determination made based on the facts and the circumstances, and applying the conduct of that organization to the definition. I'm not an expert on BLM, so I don't feel like I should make a determination on that. But what I will say is that it's important that, particularly with a general order of this nature, that allegations that are waged about them are taken very seriously, and that they're appropriately investigated, and that, you know, the ground ball, so to speak, is run out. So I would expect that to happen if it involved BLM, and I think the results of that investigation would, be the deciding factor on that.
This is a question from Commissioner Beth Brown. So to clarify, does membership alone in a bias-based group constitute a violation of this policy?
Yes, it's an association, but there would have to be, so Beth, to answer your question, the short answer is yes. However, I'll emphasize again that whether or not the group is a bias-based group isn't just completely subjective, right? There are factors set forth in the general order that provide you with guidelines as to what that looks like. Certainly membership in a group that falls within those guidelines would be disciplinable, I might have made up a word, activity.
We have time for one more question. It's a follow-up to Jessica Eanes' question. Is there any obligation of disclosure by officers in those situations to help facilitate public trust that these situations aren't loopholes?
So if in the general order, there is no language that specifically says that officers are obligated to disclose if they are part of a bias-based organization. However, there are other orders within, CPD's code of conduct that talks about those kinds of disclosures and when they have to be made. There's also other orders that require police officers to disclose on other police officers if they're aware that that police officer is, engaging in misconduct or otherwise violating policy. So this general order will be read in context with all of the other rules and regulations and guidelines that CPD officers are expected to follow. So it's not specific in this general order, but to the extent that police officers do have an obligation to disclose, again, on themselves and one another, that would certainly apply to this general order.
Great. We're at the top of the hour, so Remel and Yvette, if you'd like to wrap up and encourage people to go to the various feedback forums, that'd be great.
Yes, thank you all again for everyone who participated. If there is any follow-up that is needed, please feel free to reach out to Yvette and myself or the commission, and please provide public comment and click on the links that have been provided and attend our upcoming meeting on the 13th as well. But thank you all again for being in attendance.
Yeah, thank you to all of you. And also, I do just want to say, all of your questions today have been excellent questions. And you kept us on our toes for sure. Please do that in all of the opportunities available for public comment. It's really important that we get your feedback. We want your feedback. And we want to be told if there's something that we missed or we could have done better, or there's something else that we need to be thinking about that we just didn't. So please share your feedback with us. That's what we're here for today. And we really appreciate how engaged everybody was in all of the excellent questions. It helps us every time we are challenged or asked to think about this in a different way. So we're very appreciative of that.